Welcome to In the Fire, a podcast for the young families of Chapelgate Presbyterian Church. Marriage and parenting are a wonderful blessing and are extremely rewarding, but they're also really hard and can leave us feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, and defeated. That's exactly why we started this podcast, to help families see how the gospel injects encouragement, comfort, and hope into the daily grind of our lives, and to remind you that you're never alone in the struggle. There is another In the Fire.
Welcome to In the Fire. My name is Gicking. I'm the host of this podcast, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, Eliza Huie, who is the Director of Counseling at McLean Bible Church in Virginia. Eliza, thanks for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Well, we're really excited. Obviously, today's podcast is going to be on raising emotionally healthy kids. Mm-hmm. And I thought you might know something to do with that, given that you wrote a book with that exact title.
I did. And it's actually just a pleasure to talk to Chapelgate families. Chapelgate is a very near and dear to my heart after working at Life Counseling Center for many years. I know a lot of the families, and I know a lot of young families are very invested in knowing, like, how do I raise my kids in this season of life and not just season of life, but just the culture that we're raising our kids in and stuff. So I am thrilled to be here and thrilled to be able to talk about this little book that I wrote. Hopefully it's helpful to the families.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sure it is and will be. And before we get too deep into, the core of our material today, I want to make sure that our guests get to know you a little bit. And so Eliza was being modest. She also does stuff with the seminary here at Metro Baltimore. She's a dean of counseling. Is that right?
Yep. I sure am.
So she's not busy at all. But anyway, let's play a game, Eliza. This is called This or That. And I'm going to give two things out to you, in the form of this or that. And as fast as you can, I just want you to answer, and I want you to be honest. Okay. This is not a time to impress the 4 listeners of the In the Fire podcast.
4, okay.
Yeah. This is time to just be honest. So are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Fish or chicken?
Chicken.
Ice cream or chocolate?
Oh man, are you serious? That's not even fair. Okay. Chocolate ice cream. Can I do that?
That is fine. That counts as ice cream for those of you keeping score. Mountains or beach?
Mountains 100% of the time.
Dogs or cats?
Oh gosh. That's so hard. I really like them both. If you ever watched me scroll through Instagram, it's both of those things. So I'm going to say dogs today.
That's good, because that is actually the correct answer. Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter?
Lord of the Rings.
Candy corn or Whoppers?
Whoppers.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh gosh, that's hard too. They're both good. Star Wars. I'm probably going to make some enemies on this one, but just hear me that it could be either. So I'm going to say, the game is either or, isn't it? Oh no, that means I do have to choose.
Yep. You got to choose.
I'll go with Star Wars.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, final bonus round. This is the make or break ballot here.
All right.
NSYNC or Backstreet Boys?
That's actually really hard too, knowing the era that I grew up in. Oh man, I'm going to go with either one. I'll go with Backstreet Boys.
Yep, you want it that way. I get it. It makes sense. I was going to say it was tearing up my heart if you chose NSYNC, but I guess either way is good. Well, Eliza, thanks for playing. I'm sure that our listeners will be, some of them were cheering along and some of them are probably outraged, but you know what? That's just the cost of being a celebrity,
Oh, right.
Well, Eliza, obviously we didn't make this meeting time so that we could talk about this or that, although that is fun. We're actually here to talk about kids and specifically raising children in, our modern world. And so I guess my first question is, what are some of the things that you see both in a professional standpoint and just as a Christian, as a mom yourself, like what are you seeing as the trends of today's children?
Gosh, yeah. Well, so one of the things that I think probably almost everybody is aware of is just how much the pandemic has impacted our kids. Many children, like every bit of their structure was removed, and all of the things that create a certain amount of stability and just even comfort in their life was removed in those almost 2 years that we were in various ways of lockdown and quarantine. And I think this is something that it's not just I'm thinking about that, but our country is thinking about it. And in fact, this year, this January, so not all that long ago, there was an announcement by the American Psychological Association that basically said that the youth in the US are in a mental health crisis. And so this is something that we're all feeling, that there is a crisis amongst the youth. And I would say even it's not just in the US, that we're seeing this in the UK, in Canada, and other places as well. That there's these global surveys that are going around because we're seeing that kids are deeply affected emotionally, more significantly from the pandemic. But that wasn't just the pandemic. Things were happening. I mean, as I mentioned, I was a part of Life Counseling Center for many years, and we saw children there, and kids were struggling before that. So I think the pandemic almost just like brought it to light and kind of fast forwarded, the whole situation and put it right down in the center of parents' vision, of just, hey, you can't ignore this. This is really happening. And we're seeing it in various ways. I would say like anxiety is probably significant. That has been on the rise and continues to be on the rise, as well as depression and other emotional struggles that kids have. But we're seeing that show up more and more and younger, when it used to be around somewhere between 10, 11, kids would start to, we would start to see kids, parents mainly seeking out care for their kids. Now it's getting younger and younger to where we're seeing the average age around between 6 and 8 instead, which is a lot younger for kids dealing with things. So yeah.
That's really, that's alarming.
It is concerning for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the questions I think, and I think this actually got brought up in our class that you taught at the seminary when we did the biblical counseling side is, do you feel this is it an either or, is it an and? Are we better at diagnosing? Are we better at seeing the issues? Or do you think, and that's why the numbers are increasing? Or is this really like, hey, the struggles and the challenges and the obstacles that kids are facing today really are different, and that's partially why we're seeing this increase in such case notice,
Yeah,
numbers?
I think a lot of people are asking that question. And the thing that I would say to that is, so let's just kind of go back in history, not all that long ago. And it used to be, specifically as we're talking about the church, being in the church and Christians, it used to be a lot more taboo to talk about emotional struggles, and counseling was seen with a certain amount of like negative stigma attached to it.
Right.
That's not the case anymore. The times have changed, and now actually it's pretty popular. It's kind of cool. It's kind of trendy, if you will, to have a counselor, to be going to therapy. And this is also true for children. So this is not just adults who are now like, I have my therapist, I have my counselor, but now kids as well are seeing it as something that is also no longer attached to any, there's nothing wrong, if you will, air quotes, wrong with you if you have a counselor is actually showing health. And so I think that shift has made us talk about these things more openly, which is really good. But I also think part of it too is that kids are far more aware of mental health challenges and mental health struggles than they used to be. For example, when I was a kid, mental health struggles or mental health diagnosis even were something for adults. Like we did not ever, it wasn't something that we were talking about as kids. We weren't hearing of our friends dealing with struggles emotionally. That isn't to say that there weren't struggles, but it was more like something that adults dealt with. Now that is not the case. And so more and more kids are aware of mental health issues. They see it on social media. They have friends who are struggling with different things. They themselves feel a lot of emotions a lot of the time, and they're willing and able actually to talk about it a lot more openly. So I think that has also presented a lot more of a need, and parents can actually feel really lost in it because, they want to care for their child well, but they also don't really know, like if they're a parent, they weren't dealing with this stuff as a child. And so it's new territory for them in the realm of parenting. So I think it's all of those things kind of add to just how the prevalence of what we're seeing.
Yeah, I can certainly see that in my own, limited professional experience, doing youth ministry with middle and high school students, over the past 8 years compared to when I was even right in middle and high school ministry is, I can't remember a single time that a colleague, a peer of mine in middle or high school said that they suffered from, fill in the blank,
Right.
struggle. They, I just feel stressed, or like I feel tired, or I feel this. Like we talk that way, but now having done youth ministry for 8 years, I mean, it was common. It was commonplace, to the point where when I was coaching my group discussion leaders, I would say, hey, listen, help the students see how this passage applies to their depression, to their anxiety, to their, their struggle with their own self-esteem fluctuating, off the chart high or off the chart low. And I think that you're right. There is a sense in which our kids are dealing with this in a new way. So what are some of the things that you encourage parents to look for with their kids, to know, is my kid having a hard time, or is my kid maybe in need of a little more support than I can give?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's really kind of where I ended up tackling the direction of the book. Is it's set up in a way that there are different tips. I think there's, I don't even know. Let me look, because I actually have the book here. You think when you write a book, you know it really well, but believe it or not, you have to go back and visit it. So there's 6 tips. There's
Okay.
6 tips for parents, and one of the first couple tips talks about exactly what you're addressing here, which is, how do I know if this is teenage angst, or is this really an emotional struggle? Is this kind of that transition from the elementary, early childhood to like maybe pre-puberty, and there's a lot more emotions and hormones, or is this normal, or is this something I need to be concerned about? And so what I do in the book is I basically divide up, and really I divide it up in different ages and stages of children, and what's normal and what you should be concerned about, and even what questions you could ask. And I start from birth and I go up to all the way up through teen years. And so if you have a child at home who's a toddler or a teenager, you're going to benefit from some of these things. And it's helpful because you can just turn to whatever age group your children are in and read what I share there. And so basically what I'm trying to help parents see is there are some things that are actually normal, though they kind of present as alarming. So let me give you one example. This happens to me a lot. So I get phone calls from parents who are wondering the very question you just asked, is this something I need to be concerned about? And one of the things that happens often is children in the ages around, I would say it's around 8 to 11, in that age group, they become more self-aware. They become more aware of how people perceive them, and what they can do or they cannot do to kind of gain positive or negative attention and so forth. And their peers begin to matter a whole lot more. They've developed empathy in a very strong way, so they feel a lot stronger towards situations than maybe when they were little. And they, with this self-awareness, there's a natural tendency to, with this self-awareness, become a little bit more hyper-focused on yourself. And so you see certain tendencies in that age group to be very self-conscious, and to it can be manifested in various kind of nervous ways. And this is in some ways can be concerning, because a child who normally felt very confident, you're starting to see them be very insecure in different ways. But what I would tell parents is, let's give this some time. Now, if that's all there is that they're seeing, then I would say, let's give it some time. If there's other things that parents will share, then we'll talk a little bit more and try to see if this is something where counseling might be helpful. But that's just a season of life, if you will, an age that kids go through when they begin to make that shift and become more self-aware, that you'll start to see certain things that you didn't see before. It doesn't mean you need to rush them to counseling. It does mean that we need to pay attention and help them think through that. But being aware of how hormones impacts the children at different ages and stages, being aware of just even what is normal development of an emotional awareness is very helpful. And so I address that. Like I said, I divided up in different ages and stages, and then talked about what parents can do and when parents need to be a little bit more concerned. And I think that's probably been the thing that I've heard has been most helpful for parents, is that they're able to say, okay, I was really worried about this, but I see that kind of falls into kind of a normal part of this stage. Or I wasn't really worried about it, and I see these other things that you shared that kind of make me realize I need to be more attentive to what's going on.
And both matter, right? I mean, on you can do damage on both sides of that coin, right? If I'm a father who, just sort of it just washes it off, oh, it's no big deal, no big deal. I'm like, well, okay, maybe I have a child who really does need a little more support, a little more help, a little more targeted approach than I'm able to offer. That could be hurtful. And at the same time, if I panic every time my kid has a struggle, maybe
Right.
they're going through some normal things, but the way I respond as kind of the leader of a parent, a mom, a dad, I mean, that can cause a lot of anxiety. Like, oh my gosh,
Sure.
I'm just a kid, but my parents think there's something tragically wrong with me, and maybe there is.
Yeah. And it's true. I mean, we can misstep on either side. The good thing is if you as a parent are listening to this and you're saying, I want to help my child be in the most possible, as much as it depends on you as a parent, best place for their emotional health, then you're already doing good. You're already, navigating this well, and asking good questions is always really an important thing. I think that's oftentimes parents don't even know what I'm supposed to ask. And in one of the tips that I talk about regarding your children's feelings, you kind of touched on this a little bit, like, do we overreact or do we sometimes underreact? And in that section, when I talk about regarding their feelings, that can be really hard, especially if you're in a stage with your child, or you just have a child whose personality, I'm sure there's some parents out there whose children are like very emotional, like everything kind of sets them off. Knowing how to navigate that can be really, really tricky. And one of the things that I share in there is just, how do you regard your child's feelings when their feelings seem to always be kind of on the high end of the spectrum? And then also when you have a child who tends to kind of just always be like, I'm fine, I'm okay. And there's also a concern in kind of, if you will, unintentionally neglecting that child because they just don't make a fuss about anything, and so I give some tips on how do you regard their feelings. And one of the best things you can do is begin to learn how to ask good questions that are not interrogating questions, but are questions that draw them out. And I give a lot of sample questions that you can use in there, because I know a lot of times for parents, it's like, just give me some direction on that,
Right.
especially in the teen years, there's so many tricky things to navigate. And so I share in there, here's some options you can, and that's actually one of them is with teens, you want to give them options. Teens, in case anybody has teens out there, this is not going to be new to you, but if you don't have teens, just wait, you'll see. Teens don't like to be told what to do. And so if you're trying to talk with them and get them to open up, it's better if you can give them options. Would you like me to pray for you, or would you like me just to give you some space, as they're struggling through something? Like, I have a lot of suggestions in there of, here's some options, kind of like our game at the beginning, this or that, which one do you want?
Yeah. So tell me a little more. I mean, my brain is still just a little like, I mean, I have a 3-year-old, right? And
Okay.
so, a 3-year-old and 8-month-old, and it's easy to lull into a false sense of security that I won't have to deal with this until my kids are teens, right? It's the teenage angst for a reason. And yet I'm like, when at the beginning, when you said, 6 to 8-year-olds, more and more common. I mean, what are a couple tips for our young families living in Howard County, living in this high pressure? I mean, I can't tell you the number of conversations I have with people. Where are you going to send your kid to school? Like, I don't know. It's like, probably the school that's 5 feet from our house, and then they go, well, what about this? And what about this program? Like, are they learning like Latin? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, probably learning how to like build blocks. That's what kids do. But there's this huge pressure in our area for education for our kids. And, long way around the question is just like, what are some of the things that you would tell our parents of the 6 to 8-year-olds? Like, what are those tips for the 6 to 8-year-old, kids?
Yeah. And here's the thing, like, one of the things that parents need to understand is the way that you handle emotions is teaching your children how to handle emotions. So
That's super convicting.
if you are the type, even with you, as you have a 3-year-old, how are you even at that early age beginning to acknowledge and help them acknowledge their emotions? Because it's so easy. There's so many emotions that happen in a day when you've got a 3-year-old. It's so easy just to kind of be like, there it is again. There's this emotion or whatever. But speaking those words to your child. So, and I'll get to the 68-year-old, but just thinking about your age of children, those little ones, just being able to identify with them when you see them upset or happy or whatever their emotion is, to say it. Oh, look, you're happy. This is because, or whatever, and talking with them. Or it seems like you're sad right now. Are you sad? How does it feel when you're sad? And let them just talk with you about it. You're simply identifying emotions with them. And by you being willing to say, I'm going to identify that with you, I'm going to give you words for this emotion, you're actually teaching them that it's perfectly fine for us to talk about emotions. Too many times kids will go through their childhood and not really have that either indirectly or directly taught. And so they end up kind of just being quiet about it. So teaching them early it's tricky, because sometimes we can ignore emotions, especially if we're having a temper tantrum. And there is wisdom to sometimes not make a whole lot about it. But if we only ever correct or ignore emotions rather than help them identify it, you're actually teaching them how you feel about emotions. So really good in those early ages. As they get a little bit older, in the 6 or so age, again, they're already at this age able to identify and talk about their emotions. They're able to tell you how they feel a little bit more. They're able to express it in words, not just in the emotional response. And so at that age, you're going to actually, believe it or not, especially as you get closer to 8, you're going to start to see mood swings that are related to hormonal changes. Oftentimes parents will think that's not until I get into the double digits, but their bodies are starting to experience the early signs of puberty, even at 7, 8, mostly 9, somewhere in there. And so at that age, again, they're going to start looking to their peers for emotional support, not just mom and dad. And that's okay. We need to let them be okay with expressing some of their emotions. They're going to have more independent thinking at that age. And we want to view that not as rebellion, but just as them developing and growing. Like I said, they're going to be able to recognize their emotions, and they're going to vocalize them a lot differently. It's not just going to be in tears and cries or laughs and giggles. It's going to be in words themselves. So I would say for parents, continue to help your child regulate their emotions. And this is really key for parents, because oftentimes when you're parenting, you're tired. When you're parenting, you're overwhelmed a lot of the times. And it can be easy just to respond to an emotional outburst with a little bit of a similar response. So a child is upset and maybe yelling or speaking loudly or feeling a little bit out of control. It's easy for us to kind of go up a notch ourselves as parents and be like, okay, they're yelling. Let me kind of get their attention. When really what parents want to do is co-regulate with their child. So that basically is with them, come down to a level that is a little bit more calm, a little bit more relaxed. And in you doing that, children at that age still mirror their parents. And so in you calming down, in you using a different tone, in you even changing your facial expressions, helps them to regulate their own emotions. So that's a big one in that age is how are you doing, mom and dad, in regulating your emotions in that moment? And if you need a little space, take that space, because it's really important for them.
Yeah, that's so, it's funny, right? When you're when you're pregnant and you're on your way to having the baby, they give you that phrase at the hospital every time, right? If your baby's crying and you've just had enough, just put the baby down and walk out of the room. And you're like, who would get that angry, right? Who gets that angry at an innocent baby? Well, guess what? It takes all, 1 week at home, and you're like, no, me, I get that angry. I get that frustrated. And maybe even giving ourselves as parents the grace, if you will, to say hey, yeah, I can't regulate myself, much less help co-regulate my young child. I need to take a minute.
Yeah. And I would even say, as you begin to do that, your child begins to see it. as well, and they will model what you are showing them. And so another thing that you can do besides co-regulating with your children, especially in that age, I feel like you're kind of in the golden age in that 6 to 8 years old. They're old enough to kind of do a lot on their own, and yet they like to do fun things that you still like to do as a parent. But one of the things that you can teach them is to bring the Lord into these moments, these emotional moments, whether it's a good emotion or a bad emotion. Too often we think we only bring the Lord into bad emotions. When I feel sad or when I feel angry, then we have this God talk, if you will. But it's also important to bring the Lord into the good emotions that your children feel. So I can remember with my kids when they were younger, we would take them outside a lot. I really like to go outside with my kids, and we'd take these walks. We lived in the mountains in California, and we take these walks. Sounds almost like, Sound of Music, but it really wasn't. It was usually hot and dry, and they didn't always love it, but we would always enjoy it. In the end, they would find something, whether it was a snake or a turtle or a flower, and there would be some enjoyment that would come in that, and excitement, and bringing God into those moments of joy as well, and just saying how the Lord made this for us to enjoy, and look how fun it is to find this or whatever it is, or to splash around in the water or whatever it is. So bringing God into those emotions is really important, because you're going to do it when they're upset. You're hopefully going to bring them towards gospel conversations of this is why we need the Lord, or when they're hurt, we want to bring comfort from the Lord, but do it also in those good emotions as well.
Yeah. So just to summarize that, for our real young ones, we want to give them words, not just correction, right? We want, and on the highs and the low side of that, the good and the bad. For those 6 to 8 year olds, we want to give them ways to regulate by helping them co-regulate. I've literally never even heard that word, but I think I've seen it done well, and it really is very powerful. And then with our teens, we want to give them options. But with all three, at the end of the day, we want to give them God, and in both the happy, excited emotions and the sad, angry emotions, because we believe that God is there in all cases.
Yeah.
Is that pretty
Absolutely.
good?
And the thing about it is you as a parent aren't going to be there in all cases. Like you just said, there's going to be times where they're going to go through things, whether it's at school or beyond as they grow into adults. There's going to be times where your children go through things. Maybe they're at their friend's house, maybe they're at a party, maybe who knows where they are, that there are going to be some challenges. And we want them to really understand the reality of Psalm 46:1, which is God is an ever-present help in troubled times. I want my children to know that, because I'm not always going to be there for them. I mean, I hope to, but there's going to be times where I can't be. And I want to instill in them that God is present, and he is a present help for them, no matter what they face. And so that's part of like bringing God into those conversations. And then the other thing about it is sometimes our emotions get us into places where we sin, where we do things we shouldn't do. So we as parents want to model what that looks like, to bring the gospel into those moments. And this is why we need Jesus, because sometimes our emotions get the best of us, and to help your children do that as well, to bring those moments of them maybe overreacting or them responding wrongly emotionally, bring them to the cross again and say, there is forgiveness and grace available, and show them that mercy. So great opportunities as we're raising kids to bring God's presence and his truth into their emotional struggles.
Amen. Eliza, thank you so much for your time. If you guys want to learn more, obviously you can purchase Raising Emotionally Healthy Kids on Amazon, or the publisher, which is 10 of those, sells it directly, and I believe their price is better. Eliza, what other options are there for families who may want to learn a little more about this topic, or just about parenting and emotional health in general?
Sure. So this book is one of, I think, 6 or 7 in a series, and I've written 3 of them. And so I've written the Raising Emotionally Healthy Kids. I've also written Raising Kids in a Hypersexualized World. If that's something where you feel like, I don't know how to have this conversation with my child, this is a book for you. I give you some clear direction on how to have conversations, because let's just face it, our kids live in a very sexualized world. The other book that I wrote is called Raising Kids in a Screen-Saturated World, which I'm sure there isn't a parent out there that isn't feeling the weight of that. And so those are a few books that you can pick up on parenting, and you can do that at the same place you mentioned, Amazon, or 10 of those. And they can also connect with me on my website. It's just my name, elizahuie.com. you're certainly welcome to check out things I've written there and resources I have there. Also, I have my own podcast. If it's of interest to anybody, I co-host a podcast called Counsel for Life. And we talk, actually, we're about to do, I don't know when this is going to air, but we are in the middle of a series, and we're about to do one on why children can benefit from counseling. So that might be helpful for them to
Yeah,
go
no kidding.
look at.
Okay, well, I'll do this. I'm going to put the link for the book, your website, and the podcast in the show notes, so you guys can find that if you want to learn more. And then I know this is totally another episode, and maybe we can get you back on here one day, but what age for our families, what age do we need to start talking to our kids about sex?
Yeah, that is another conversation. But I will say this: talk early and talk often. I see too many times parents make it an event when their children are older. And while I don't think that's wrong in the sense of like, don't do that, I think do more than that. So talk early and talk often is what I will say. And yeah, we'll go with that.
That's perfect. Yeah, I love that. Well, Eliza, thank you so much for being here with us. I know that it's been a blessing for me, and I'm sure it's going to be a blessing for our families. And hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
Hey, y'all, as always, thank you so much for listening to this episode of In the Fire. Please check out the show notes below for lots of resources from Eliza's book and other tips and tricks that she gave us in this episode. If you want to learn more about Chapelgate, check out our website. Otherwise, we can't wait to touch base with you again next week with another episode of In the Fire.